And the wind is picking up a little bit, but we've had pretty good luck with weather so far. So every time actually we've had an event where it was supposed to rain, it didn't. So I think it's a sign that this recall is supposed to succeed. But I just want to thank everyone for being here and being part of the greatest citizens movement in California history. Anyone signed the recall by chance?
Woo!
Yeah. Good. Who here has gathered signatures for the recall? Wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you. I mean, you are making history one signature at a time. That's what it's all about. And thanks to your hard work, the people of California are going to have a chance to make this very important decision to move in a different direction as a state. So there's one other person, though, I wanted to thank. And can I borrow someone's book? Thank you. Don't let me steal it. I'll give it back. And it's actually a constituent of mine. I represent a district up north near Sacramento, and one of my constituents is on the cover of this book. Actually, it's funny. The guy who lived in the house in Fair Oaks beforehand was a big, Republican, and was one of my supporters. And then he passed away, and Gavin Newsom moved in. So Gavin Newsom is actually my constituent. I'm on his ballot on last year's election. I don't think I got his vote, though. But you might be asking, why am I thanking him? After all, he's ruined a lot of our lives. He's ruining our state. He's taken what was a long-term decline for California and brought it into a total freefall this last year. All of that, of course, is true, but I do think that Gavin Newsom has provided us with one great service, and that is he's made it so clear for everyone to see everything that is wrong with California. I mean, he's taken blaring neon lights, put them over the state capitol, and said, this here is the problem. He's taken everything that is wrong with California and put it on steroids in directing what I believe to be the worst COVID-19 response in the entire country, if not the larger Western world. I think it was Jerry Brown, actually, his press secretary, who put it best. He said, when history called, Newsom flopped. But it's not just been a failure of leadership. If it were just a failure of leadership, maybe the recall wouldn't have had as much momentum as it does. What it's been, really, is an abuse of the public trust. An abuse of the public trust like I don't think we've ever seen. I mean, Gavin Newsom, this governor, has taken extraordinary emergency powers and abused them for personal political gain. He's taken all of our shared sacrifice, so much sacrifice, over this last year and cashed it in for self-promotion. And that's the first adjective I use to describe him and his worst in the nation COVID-19 response in this book. Marissa here's read it 3 times, so she can tell you.
Yeah.
I have 8 adjectives, a chapter devoted to each, describing the defining qualities of Gavin Newsom's worst in the nation COVID-19 response. The first one is self-promotional. And people tell me they can think of other adjectives to add to the list. There's certainly an endless number of them. But does anyone here doubt that Gavin Newsom used the arrival of the coronavirus on our shores to launch his 2024 presidential campaign?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I remember when this whole thing started back in March. I know it seems like a lifetime ago, but remember these press conferences were just must-see TV, weren't they? Or at least he imagined them to be. They'd be breathlessly advertised on his social media in all caps. Tune in! Coronavirus briefing today at noon.
Yeah.
He'd have his media advisories, tease major announcement coming at the next press conference. Then it would turn out to be like a stay-at-home order. He went on the daytime talk show circuit. He was on Ellen DeGeneres. He was on The View. He went on the late-night talk show circuit. He was on Jimmy Kimmel. He was on The Daily Show. He was on Seth Meyers. He actually told Seth Meyers, and this is an exact quote, "I'm trying to save 40 million Californians." He was trying to build sizzle, in the words of one veteran California political consultant. But as all of this was going on, as much as Newsom was reveling in the newfound attention, there was something that was bothering him. There was something that was, rankling. And that's that there was another governor on the other side of the country who was getting a lot more attention. I mean, Andrew Cuomo's press conferences got carried live on CNN. He won an Emmy for them, if you can believe that. Now, Cuomo's in a bit of hot water himself these days. You've been following the news. I don't know that he'd be the first Emmy winner convicted of a felony, by the way. But, these days, Newsom and Cuomo seem to be competing over who will be removed from office first. But back in the beginning of all this, Newsom was so desperately competing to take some of the spotlight from Cuomo. So he kept coming up with these just, splashy announcements that he'd make at his press conferences to try to get more attention. But they'd usually just be, turn out to be nothing, or they'd be completely made up. The Sacramento Bee, which was a newspaper that had actually endorsed him, they gave him a nickname. Remember what it was, Marissa?
On the spot.
Governor Gaslight.
Gaslight.
Oh, yeah.
I'll give you another chance. How about that?
Didn't know she was going to do this.
Governor Gaslight.
There's a pop quiz now, Mr.
I know, pop quiz. So she is my #1 Twitter follower, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
If anyone's on Twitter,
Yeah, right.
every time I post something, maybe it's a good tweet, maybe it's not. There's always a better tweet from Marissa in response to it. So, Governor Gaslight, that's what the Sacramento Bee dubbed him. And this all culminated with one of the shadiest deals we've ever seen. One of the biggest scandals in California history. Newsom reached a $1 billion deal for masks with BYD China, a company run by the Chinese Communist Party, a company with ties to forced labor, a company that had a history of defective products, and sure enough, their masks failed federal safety tests twice. But Newsom went behind at the back of the legislature, secretly awarded this contract on a no-bid basis, wired half of the money, $500 million, in advance, just so that he could go on the Rachel Maddow show and make a big primetime announcement that California is no longer just a state. It is a nation state. Surely Andrew Cuomo couldn't compete with that, right? And it actually worked, initially. The next morning, you could almost hear the sound of champagne corks popping in the governor's office. Hashtag President Newsom had started trending on Twitter.
Yep.
I can assure you of this. We will never see President Newsom trending on Twitter again.
Yes.
Thanks to everyone's efforts here, it's much more likely to be hashtag former Governor Newsom.
Please.
So that's the first adjective, is self-promotional. The second is lawless. On April 1st, Governor Newsom, at a press conference, celebrated the novel coronavirus as an opportunity. In his words, an opportunity for a new progressive era. An opportunity, and this is a quote, to reshape the way we do business and how we govern. That's how Gavin Newsom was thinking of this virus like 3 weeks into the state of emergency. And what that meant in the ensuing months was he took our civic institutions, our cherished American institutions, and put them through a paper shredder. The rule of law, separation of powers, checks and balances, representative democracy, the Constitution itself. He fashioned himself in the mold of an ancient Roman dictator, claiming that a state of emergency, no matter how long it lasts, quote, centralizes the state's powers in his hands. That, by the way, is exactly what the father of the U.S. Constitution, James Madison, defined as the very definition of tyranny. Gavin Newsom, during this state of emergency, has unilaterally changed over 400 California laws. He's remade the life of our state one pen stroke at a time. This is something that our system of government has never contemplated. And specifically, it's something that the California Constitution does not allow. Our state constitution does not countenance an autocracy, a dictatorship, under any circumstances, and certainly not for an endless state of emergency. That's why we took him to court, and that's why we won. Third adjective is corrupt. And this one has sort of the pride of place on the cover. I could have picked any number of the other adjectives, most corrupt, most self-promotional, most lawless, but I chose corrupt because I think it defines Gavin Newsom more than anything else. And someone I was just chatting with me at the table there about fresh evidence of this just a couple days ago. We learned that he used his emergency powers to award many more no-bid contracts to his top campaign donors. This was a bombshell report just a couple days ago from Capitol Public Radio. But the example I begin this chapter with is something that was known as the California Economic Recovery Commission. You probably don't even remember that this existed, since so many bad things have happened since. And it was disbanded last December. The Economic Recovery Commission was, because, mission accomplished. The economy's doing great. But does anyone remember who he put in charge of this commission?
I do.
Marissa, who was it?
Steyer. And I heard when he put hedge fund billionaire, I hope he cried during the GameStop thing. I hope he cried.
You know, I've
Who
been.
was it?
I've,
Who
I've
was
had-
it? What was her answer?
So
Tom
the
Steyer?
answer is Tom Steyer.
Oh.
And I've had a number of these events, and I think you're the first person who's actually known that was the case, which is so interesting
I
because
associated him with a meme, and that's how it's easier to remember.
there you go. We all remember Tom Steyer. He had the Vanity presidential campaign, right? Billionaire. But he also is the single biggest campaign contributor to Democrats in United States history. He's given over $250 million. And that is what defines Gavin Newsom to me more than anything else, is he just sells his power to the highest bidder. And when his power is absolute, that becomes a really big problem, which is the quote I begin the whole book with. It's the classic quote, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And where we've seen that, you know, more egregiously than anywhere is with our schools. Gavin Newsom has kept our schools, and by the way, Marie is here who's been fighting for kids in Orange County as member of the County Board of Education. So thank you, Marie. She's been doing everything she can to assure the kids have access to a real education here, and to, you know, or to the education that they prefer, to have options. But Gavin Newsom has kept the vast majority of our schools shut down at the behest of his biggest campaign donor, the biggest campaign donor in the entire state by a mile, the California Teachers Association, and has done incalculable harm to millions of kids that we're going to be dealing with for a long, long time. I mean, if that doesn't make you America's most corrupt governor, I'm not sure what does. But I will say, on a positive note, you know, I've been worried. I'm worried more than anything else about what this all has done to kids. You know, and we see the effects already in terms of mental health, in terms of learning loss, and we know that there are going to be long-term consequences. I've also been worried, are they just going to, you know, are young people just going to come to the understanding that this is the way things are supposed to be, right? But I actually see sort of the opposite happening, you know, with the Let Them Play movement. If anyone's been part of that, you've probably been part of that, Marie. Getting kids back with youth sports. We were the last state in the country to allow youth sports to continue. And I think it's just so important that young people come out of this dark era, not with, you know, a tolerance for authoritarianism, but with an appreciation for its evils. And I think that's what we are seeing with the Let Them Play movement, and that's what our kids are learning and the lesson they're taking away. And I think they can be part of the new spark of liberty and self-government that we're seeing with this whole recall movement. So that's number 3. Number 4 is unscientific. Does anyone follow Gavin Newsom on Twitter?
No.
You don't follow him? You probably see his tweets though.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Barf bag, I'll read what he said.
All right. Well, do we have any on site? I will give you just a few Gavin Newsom tweets to, you know, so your stomach can take it. And when I raise my voice, that's when he's using all caps. Gavin loves the all caps treatment. This is from April 14th. When it comes to reopening, science, not politics, must be California's guide. Get which part of the all caps was? On April 14th. The West Coast is and will continue to be guided by science. On May 4th, California is led by data and science. June 24th, this isn't about politics, it's about science. The next day, Dr. Fauci is right. This isn't about politics, it's about science. He didn't indicate whether Fauci himself screamed the word, by the way. Well, that's a good question. So it's about science, but it's apparently only science that California has access to. Because just a few days ago, there was yet another ranking showing that California has had the worst lockdowns of any state. Actually, we were 51 out of 50 when you count Washington, D.C. At this very moment, California is the only state where you cannot eat indoors at a restaurant.
Wow.
At this very moment, California is the only state that you cannot go to a museum.
Wow.
And we were the last state to allow youth sports, and we've had the worst school closures and the worst small business closures. Outdoor dining we even banned. Bowling, which hardly any other state did. Curfews. And you have had many scientists at places like UC San Francisco say that not only has this done needless harm, but it's actually backfired and contributed to the spread of the virus.
Right.
The cure hasn't just been worse than the disease, it's made the disease worse. This is what Nate Silver said. Do you guys know who Nate Silver is? This guy who runs the 538 website. He's considered kind of the high priest of data analysis and data science by many, many liberals, actually. Here's what he said. Not that I had a particularly high opinion of it before, but the irrational and not very science-driven regime of COVID policies in California, coupled with the hypocrisy of so many elected officials there, has really lowered my opinion of the quality of governance in that state. Well, he mentioned hypocrisy. That happens to be another of the 8 adjectives. Hypocritical. And this one kind of explains itself. But I'll give you, can you take a few more Gavin Newsom tweets?
Yes.
I don't want to, I don't want to make anyone upset. When Newsom announced the mask mandate, here's what he tweeted. Don't be selfish, wear a mask. He tweeted it again. Don't be selfish, wear a mask. On 17 occasions, in all caps, he tweeted, wear a mask, or wear your mask, or wear period, a period, mask period.
Yeah, maybe he should have wore his mask at the front.
Well, he tweeted lowercase versions of that dozens of times. He said, be kind, wear a mask. He said, be smart, wear a mask. He described wearing a mask as a sign of toughness, a sign of someone who gives a damn, which Newsom called a beautiful thing. My personal favorite. Me again, you really, 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 really need to wear a mask. And it was a few weeks after that tweet that he went to the French Laundry. But the French Laundry only scratches the surface of Newsom's hypocrisy. We know that he sent his kids to private school, while he forced millions of others to stay at home. And it only scratches the surface of our entire state government's hypocrisy. Did you know that there's a secret DMV office right across the street from the state capitol that only legislators get to use?
Yes, I heard that.
The service, from what I'm told, is very quick and streamlined and smooth. I introduced a bill, by the way, to shut that down. You can probably guess how that went over. But it's the truth, is that we have a political class that has applied one set of rules to themselves and one set of rules to everyone else and hasn't had to live with the consequences of their own failed policies. So the French Laundry, that's not just some lapse in judgment from Gavin Newsom. It's a parable for the decline of modern California. The 6th adjective is incompetent. Incompetent. So I mentioned the DMV. That used to be the poster child for government failure. We have a new poster child for government failure, and it's Gavin Newsom's EDD. And let's just trace this thing from start to finish. Well, I can't say finish, because who knows where it's going to lead next. But from the beginning, we had millions of people forced out of work on Gavin Newsom's orders. As taxpayers, they've been paying into a system that entitles them to modest unemployment checks to help them get by. Because of Gavin Newsom's incompetence, they, in many cases, did not receive those checks for months or ever. There you go. There's an example. And, we had people who couldn't put food on the table. Yet there was one group of people who got their checks very quickly without any problems. Who was that? Well, that's one example. Yeah, I was thinking of it's prisoners. Oh, yeah. Who were easily able to outwit Gavin Newsom and his EDD, who ignored several warnings from the federal government, who didn't follow the best practices of the vast majority of other states, and who allowed a fraud that is now estimated to be on the order of $31 billion. Oh my God. Which we will be paying taxes for to make up for. And you're probably thinking, what a colossal waste. It, after all, is the biggest taxpayer fraud by far in California history. What a waste. But if only it were just a waste. Because remember, this money is not vanished into thin air, it's going to criminals. And district attorneys are now reporting that it's being used by street gangs to buy weapons to terrorize their communities. That is the price of Gavin Newsom's incompetence. And I'll just give you sort of a footnote on this, by the way, something that happened after the book. President Joe Biden did his first weekly address recently. Okay, Joe Biden did his first weekly address recently, and he had a guest on. I don't know if anyone has ever watched these. The president does like a weekly video address. So his first guest was actually a constituent of mine from Roseville. Someone said they lived in Roseville. And she had written a letter to President Biden, so he invited her to be the guest for his first weekly address. And it turned out she had been put out of work by Gavin Newsom and wasn't able to get her unemployment check. And so she turned to my office to try to help her, and we were able to help her get her check. And so President Biden's first weekly video address was about my office having to clean up Gavin Newsom's mess. So I'd say that's a pretty good sign. If, weather's holding out, that happened. Things are maybe lining up. The seventh adjective is partisan. Gavin Newsom is the most partisan governor in the United States. If you actually watch him on Twitter, he's constantly engaging in partisan warfare. He's trolling United States senators. He tweeted insults at Mitch McConnell 27 times in 2019.
Jesus.
And during COVID, he took that partisan warfare to perverse levels. He actually released a chart that supposedly ranked red and blue states by COVID cases. And the thing was totally spurious. He took it as a screenshot off of a website called Dan's COVID Charts and then released it. And now, of course, he's using partisan warfare as his weapon to try to fight the recall. You know, they're saying, for example, one of his closest allies called it a MAGA revenge fantasy. After this senator put that on Twitter, dozens of his own liberal Bernie crap followers replied saying, no, actually, we support the recall. Because I haven't got my unemployment check, because my kids are in school, or because I haven't got my shot, or whatever the case may be. And I actually went and looked at who these people are, and they're like retweeting AOC and Bernie Sanders, and they're supporting the recall. I mean, this is not only the greatest citizens movement in California history, it's the most diverse movement in California history. So Gavin Newsom's the most partisan and divisive governor in the country, but in his own way, he's managing to bring us all together. The eighth and final adjective, I shouldn't say final because there are so many more, but the eighth one in the book is neglect. And by that I mean, as Gavin Newsom has to this day continued to boast about being the first governor to impose a stay-at-home law, he's actually been the last when it comes to just about everything else of a public health response. When it's come to testing, when it's come to protecting vulnerable populations, when it's come to the botched vaccine rollout, and when it's come to our healthcare workers. You might remember hearing about something called the California Health Corps. This was launched way back at the beginning of this. It was designed to get doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals who were retired and were out of the workforce for some reason to step forward and help out. 94,000 people did. They stepped up and said, we want to help keep California through this. So at the time that Gavin Newsom imposed his last stay-at-home order in December, which was done because we didn't have enough healthcare capacity, supposedly, do you know how many of those 94,000 people he had actually utilized?
Wasn't it like under 100 or
Was
so?
it 0?
It is. It's 21.
I was gonna say that, but I wasn't sure.
Wasn't he also supposed to fast track like nursing students so they could use clinical hours and get their licenses?
You're right about that. We were one of the last states to do that, to fast track nursing students. There's many examples like this.
I got called about the hospital ship because I work in healthcare to see my availability, and then I never got called.
There you go. There's so many examples like this. I have many people who say the exact same thing that I quoted here. They're saying that we signed up, and you stepped forward. You wanted to help, and you never got called.
Yeah, just my availability, and that was it.
Well, thank you. There you go. Perfect example. So because of all of this, even though California had the worst lockdowns, at the end of last year, there were headlines like in the San Jose Mercury News, or maybe the San Francisco Chronicle, California has the nation's worst COVID surge by a wide margin. So it's the same thing we've become accustomed to as Californians, as we pay the highest taxes, yet drive over the deepest potholes.
Yeah.
You know, we sacrifice the most and get the least in return. And we know that California's problems were boiling over even before COVID-19.
Yes.
I mean, we have the worst homeless by far of any state.
AB 5.
We have the worst. AB5.
That's when I started following
Chapter 2
you.
is all about AB5.
Okay.
So
That's
it's,
when I started
that's
following
the
you.
sort of the precursor to all of this is AB5. But we've got the worst homeless, the worst poverty, the worst inequality, the worst education outcomes for our most vulnerable students, the worst infrastructure nearly, roads, bridges, water infrastructure. There was one survey before COVID-19 where 53% of Californians said that they're thinking of leaving. 53%. I mean, that's called a failed state when half of your people want out.
With this weather.
Is anyone, exactly, is anyone in that 53%, by the way? Right here. There you go. Does anyone know someone who's left California in the last year or two? Because of it. It's incredible. Yes, the weather. We have such an incredible state, our amazing people, natural beauty. We have everything to offer. And yet it's all just been overwhelmed by the failures of our government. And the recall is a chance to fix our government. You know, it's a chance to root out corruption, to restore government by the people. That, in my view, is the larger meaning of the recall. It's not just about throwing out Gavin Newsom, as euphoric as that will be, but it's about repudiating everything he stands for. You know, it's a fundamental course correction. It's an emphatic rejection of the status quo. It's millions of people saying with one voice, enough is enough, and reviving those forgotten words from our Declaration of Independence, the consent of the governed. It's a refusal to accept the inevitability of decline and failure as we take matters into our own hands. And I'm under no illusions that removing Newsom is going to solve all these problems overnight. I mean, it'll certainly stop further damage in the near term. But I do think that Gavin Newsom has provided us one other service, and that is that he's given us a roadmap for how we can turn things around, which is to simply do the exact opposite of everything. I'm serious. I mean, think of the 8 adjectives I just listed. The opposite of Newsom's self-promotion is humility, not only in the conduct of our governor, but in the role of government itself. So it's not running all of our lives or trying to. The opposite of Newsom's lawlessness is respecting the rule of law and our Constitution. The opposite of Newsom's corruption is serving the public interest rather than special interests. The opposite of Newsom's unscientific governance is accountability to facts, to data, to evidence. The opposite of Newsom's incompetence is a performance-based government based on a paradigm of customer service or citizen service. The opposite of Newsom's partisanship is bringing people together to solve problems. The opposite of Newsom's hypocrisy is transparency, so our elected officials are living by the same rules they impose on everyone else. And the opposite of Newsom's neglect is responsibility, so we're not kicking the can down the road, but taking responsibility for our shared future. So in closing, you know, I'm sometimes asked, and we're hearing this as a talking point among the anti-recall folks, why do we need a recall when there's an election coming up in 2022 anyway?
We can't wait that long.
Well, thank you. That's the first answer, is we can't allow Gavin Newsom to abuse the public trust for 2 more years,
And
right?
so he can't run for president or anything.
Well, there's also that.
I'm raising my hand.
But I do think, you know, the timing is really optimal. And here's why. Because if the recall is successful this year, then next year, any legislators or anyone else who hasn't gotten the message that the era of corruption is over, they'll get the chance to face voters as well.
Right.
And that'll give the people of California a chance to affirm the new approach, to cement the recall's goals. So, you know, this extraordinary movement isn't just some one-off event, but has lasting significance. You know, it reshuffles the whole stacked deck of our political system. It can set us on a whole new course. And if that happens, you know, there's nothing that we can't achieve. We can start leading the nation again, not in poverty, inequality, hopelessness, but in the right ways, you know? We can reclaim the things we've always stood for as a state: opportunity, innovation, daring, risk-taking, upward mobility, and most of all, our right as a free people to govern ourselves. So I happen to think California is worth fighting for. I know that you guys do as well.
Always been.
And so let's go out and recall this governor. Thank you very much. And I'll keep signing books over here.